welcome to episode 124 of Genn and Millie, where a Gen Xer and a millennial share the strength-based perspective through which they view the world. We are your hosts, Allison and Dr. Tess Starman. We have a big celebration today as Tess recently defended her dissertation, and I was lucky enough to be in the Zoom audience. I have so much to say about beaming mom face pride, but really hope that in this episode, Tess will share a little bit behind the scenes of what this has been like, because it's been a remarkable journey. And a lot of you who are our listeners have been along for it. But I also want to speak to the experience of witnessing someone that I know well, and I know in their talent and in their purpose, and witnessing others witness that. So I think we'll have an engaging dialogue today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about it like, unless you have the opportunity to work with someone, right? Like directly, like you and I met in the workplace, so we got to witness each other doing work. Like our friends and family and loved ones don't get the opportunity to do that, right? In most cases, right? You don't like take your partner to work day or take your friend to work day, right? But of course, this opportunity, and I had so many friends and family join, was just such a cool opportunity, I think, for them to witness. You know, I can talk about my work all the time and about my dissertation, and I have to most people, but it's always been kind of this abstract, I think, thing that they've heard about but don't really know the ins and outs of. And a lot of my friends and family have like asked to read it, but it's like a very lengthy document and needs to be written in a scientific way, which isn't always accessible to everyone. And certainly part of the actual like defense meeting, the defense time that you attended, was part of that too. But I feel like it was more like I tried to make it more accessible. And I think because it's social science, because of my topics, everyone has had some sort of interaction with politics and with religion and with racism and homophobia, something like they know about it or they've experienced it to some way, shape, or form. So a lot of people were able to, I think, reflect personally too on that. So yeah, it was, of course, nerve-wracking. It's this, you know, for those who've never gone through the process of a PhD, right? It's like everything is working towards this moment. Like this is make or break. This is when I earn my degree and get to say I'm an expert or not. It's, you know, what I'm evaluated, like this meeting is what I'm evaluated on as to whether or not they'll say that I've earned my PhD. And so, you know, no pressure or anything. And certainly there's like the written dissertation, of course, but then the oral component also. So you're evaluated on both. And during this time, basically I was given the opportunity to first open the meeting by presenting a summary of my findings, but of course I was also asked to contextualize that in terms of how I framed the work, how I went about and did the work, what my research questions were. So I was given initially 20 minutes, I was told, which for an over 100-page document, that's really, really rich and robust. That's really, really hard to do. And so I was told, okay, you can go up to 25 minutes. And then basically when I was framing this, because I was so particular on time, and I think my context, my learner, my intellection, that's up in my top 10, wanted to do it justice, I knew that I would say more than I had the space for if I just rolled with slides as guidance or an outline. And so I actually wrote myself a script. And it's the first time I have ever presented from a script, ever, in my entire life. All the public speaking I've done, all the presentations I've done, first time I've ever used a script. And I'm really glad that I did, because I wanted to contextualize quotations that I brought forward and people's stories and narratives, and some of those things I didn't recall off the top of my head because I spoke to so many people. So I'm really glad that I did, and I felt like I tried to make it engaging, even though I was reading like word for word a script. And then the week of my dissertation defense, I met with my committee on Monday and went through my presentation. And I was timing at like 22 minutes on the script, 23 maybe, right? And of course, I walked away with them asking me to add a bunch of things. And I said, I'll add some of these things, but it's going to push me a little over time. So I did, and I'm glad I did. Their recommendations were really great. And so I made those adjustments, and then Friday opened with presenting. And then after about the 30 minutes of my presentation, then my committee got the opportunity to do 2 rounds of questions. And then they deliberated to discuss and then make their decision, which is you pass both your written and your oral, you pass one and fail another, you fail both. And then of the passing scores you can pass with distinction or pass with high distinction are the evaluations. And then they come back and tell me their decision. They actually invited me back into their room first to tell me their decision and take a photo with me that they then sent to the dean, and then to bring back into the entire group. So that's like the overall of what happened. As far as the Q&A time, I think because of that was like the bulk of the time, right? It was a 2-hour scheduled defense, so half an hour of conversing, about an hour, a little more of Q&A for my committee. They gave a little bit of opportunity for audience questions, and there were a couple, and then the deliberation. And so that Q&A time with my committee, right, because it's called a defense, I'm expecting to defend my work. Like, the whole point and everything I've heard is they try and poke holes in your argument. They try and challenge what you're trying to say. And a couple questions were kind of along those lines, but I think all of them were questions that were designed to make me argue stronger for it, right? Which I guess is the point of a defense, but in many ways, I feel like it was less of an interrogation of my work and more of a really interesting conversation that I got to have with people who are really invested and interested in my work. And I think this is so much of my life and so much of my time and energy. And I think other people, it's of course not, right? Not everybody has read everything that I've written. I don't think anybody has except for me, right? And not everybody has engaged in this work clearly to the same extent that I have. Since I wrote it, I did it, all of this. So to have people that, all of my committee read my entire dissertation beforehand, but then also seeing a really kind of quick summary of it during that, I think made for really, really interesting and insightful conversation. That made me think differently about the work, made me see ways to improve the work, but then also it made me just really kind of excited and curious and engaged in general in it. So that was the Q&A portion, and then they deliberated and came back, and I passed with high distinction, and I'll make a few edits before turning in my final. But yeah, once I passed, I have officially earned my degree. It will be conferred officially May 10th, but I am now Dr. Starman.
It is, I'm beaming and will continue to for quite some time. I thought it might be fun for me to ask you a few questions after you were explaining that.
Sure.
I shared this feedback with you right after, and what I wrote down in my notebook, this is verbatim from my notebook while this was happening. I've never been part of something like this. Mm-hmm. So to witness ritual and ceremony of the highest sort of regard, and see that and witness you, and I could see your nervousness coming in, but also there was like a relaxed sort of, I am tremendously proud of this work before you even began speaking that I picked up on.
Okay, I didn't feel that.
I was hands down enthralled during the entire presentation. So what I noticed that I thought was so fascinating is I witnessed the evolution of Tess from a data narrative to a data and storytelling narrative. It was like when you spoke in the voice of the people that you interviewed, when you spoke in their voice, there was compassion and appreciation and empathy and depth of understanding that colored in the data in such a way that it was like, it made it come alive. It made the data just absolutely like leap off of your slide. So I was enthralled during the presentation, and so were you. You were enthralled during the presentation. Like, I know you had to use a script, but you were not in the script, right? You were in your heart, and your being able to speak to everything about it. Hi, George.
Yes, George is here with us, of course.
George is awake. He was napping, and
beautifully. And I said, of course, we'll see how long this lasts during this conversation.
Like all wonderful children senses when there is a shift in the container. I really hope that when I noticed in the Q&A, George is his own person. Okay. During the Q&A portion was when I really picked up on the engagement level of the audience.
Okay.
Right, because prior to, I'm listening to you. I am paying attention to, what others are doing. That's my jam, right? I pay attention to engagement. And everyone has a kind of a signal or a tell, T-E-L-L, as to whether or not they're engaged. Some people lean in further. Some people look off into the distance because you can tell they're thinking. And I noticed that so significantly during the Q&A part. The questions were amazing. Some of the best questions, it would have taken me months, and will still take me months to come up with the questions that your colleagues and professors had for you. I thought that was pretty remarkable. And then my hope is that you will acknowledge the very specific praise and recognition that they spoke to you as a student. Like not just, we really love Tess around here, but how much you will be missed, how your diligence as a student, star student, those very specific nods to your dedication and your passion. So those are a couple of things that I noticed. What I also thought we should bring it to is, if you had to explain to a 10-year-old what your dissertation was about, how would you explain it?
Oh my gosh, that is such a hard question. Do 10-year-olds know what politics are?
Yes.
Okay. So I would say my dissertation looks at how politics has impacted religion. And I specifically look at that relationship from the perspective of people who think too much politics has become a part of our religion, and too much of religion has become a part of our politics. And so they've made the decision to leave their religion.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Okay, that's one of my questions. The other question, I think you spoke to this a little bit, how your strengths contributed to this process, how your strengths contributed to the success of not just the presentation part, of course, but like this entire very long journey. Yeah, I think certainly a lot of context being my number one. I think I think framing a lot of my work, my intellectual work, with this is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on for a while. I always want to situate what's happening currently with the threads and the context and the situations that led to where things are at today. So certainly there's a lot of that, which has been pervasive throughout all of my work, not just my dissertation. But then also I think one perhaps barrier of having context so high was I did experience a lot of stress and anxiety around the administrative steps that were needed for completing the PhD, like just not having gone through an academic program like this before. So, and I alleviated those sorts of stressors by reaching out to like people in cohorts ahead of me to say, how did you
do your comprehensive exam reading lists, and how did you create your dissertation committee? And, but certainly some of those things I got wrong along the way because I wasn't certain about how to approach it. So, so certainly a lot of context, certainly a lot of adaptability too. I wasn't aware how the timeline would work, where I would be at which certain steps. I knew what I needed to do very broadly, but all of those things kind of shifted as I was working through the program. Certainly a lot of learner, of course, that's all of this. This made I think if I retook strengths right now, learner would probably be number one, because they shift in different seasons. And I think that that desire for depth, for mastery, for knowledge that feels comprehensive and sits deep within you certainly is something that I got to experience during this program, especially my first year. I think a lot about that. Like, there wasn't a lot of pressure. I wasn't teaching at that point. There wasn't a lot of pressure for my assistantship to be producing information since I was in my first year. I really got to concentrate on my classes and read a book of social theory a week and really dig into methods and kind of explore different methodologies, things like that. So, and I know that there will never be a moment in my life that I get to just sit and learn like I did during my PhD. Moving forward, taking on a faculty position, I know I'll get to continue to do some of that, but I will also teach, and I will also be on committees, and I will also be advising students, and all of these other things that are awesome and I'm excited to do, right? But I don't have to talk to anybody for the entire week, except when I'm in my 3 classes. So that kind of hermit-esque study recluse person. I got to live out that life for the last really 4 years, and it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing, and I enjoyed it much more than I should have. Spending so much time on my own, just studying and reading and writing, and yeah. I think certainly other things that came into play a lot, of course, intellection, certainly that's 8 for me. A lot of ideation, and it might feel a little odd perhaps or misplaced, but I think all of scientific inquiry is thinking differently or thinking about things differently. And because my example is my dissertation, because it's so close to what where I've been. But my dissertation was bringing together social psychology, critical social theory, the intersection of religion and politics, while examining systems of race and gender. It's a lot. I tackled a lot, but I put it together in a way that I haven't seen anybody do before, and that just made a lot of sense to me, right? And I think that's that ideation of I think a lot of people would agree with what I'm arguing, but nobody has taken it on in this kind of systemic approach and from the perspective of former Christians. A lot of people that study this study what's currently happening within Christianity, and I took the perspective of people who decided to opt out as a result. And yeah, I think so. I don't know. I think that definitely came up a lot. I mean, all of my regarding how I worked with my participants, and the stories, certainly individualization popped up, but also a lot of empathy. I reflected a lot. So at the end, when one of my advisors committee members talked about my positionality, I wrote a section in my dissertation about having been a member of this community and gone through this process myself. It was really, really hard at times. And some interviews, once I logged off, I would start crying, and I just felt the experience because of my own experiences. And so that certainly, and I don't think that's required of a researcher to feel empathy for your participants, but certainly I emotionally embodied the experiences of my participants a lot more. I think because of that empathy and because of my own personal experience. So that's what comes to mind.
Could you have imagined college freshman, college sophomore you writing this?
Not at all, of course. Yeah.
I mean, and not just taking on a dissertation, but taking on the content that you chose.
Yeah. Certainly not. Certainly not. I mean, I was, my sophomore year in undergrad at Creighton is when I first started taking sociology courses. I didn't take any my freshman year. I was introduced to it by way of anthropology. My sophomore year, fall, I took an anthro course, and then spring I took a soc course. And I was just starting to think about the reality of inequality and of oppression and of structural issues because I'd never been exposed to that way of thinking before. And so certainly I never could have imagined examining it from this topic, but also because of my lengthy and rough relationship with religion my whole life. I also was in a very weird place at that point and just kind of swinging from Catholicism more to evangelicalism at that really exact moment. And so certainly I wasn't thinking about that. I wasn't even, recognizing the way in which people wouldn't want to be a part of this until I got more into it and started seeing it from the inside and recognizing the issues. So yeah, the content, but also the approach of the content, I think, not only just the technical aspect, but kind of the way of viewing it through the lens of power, through the lens of abuses of power. Certainly those sorts of elements were all things that were introduced to me because of sociology, but then also because of my lived experience through religion.
Yes.
Yeah.
The timeline, we often talk about creating timelines and how important that is to look at the road that led to today. But I thought about that a lot as I was listening to you present, because of the growth that I have witnessed in you and the expansiveness in which I have witnessed your learning. You brought up anthropology, which I loved during the latter part. I cannot remember your professor's name.
Yeah.
She is phenomenal. I would love to have dinner, coffee, wine with her many times over. But Tess, for people who don't know, how would you explain the difference between sociology and anthropology?
That's good. I mean, I majored in both in undergrad, and I used to have a really easy response to both. I think sociology tends to start from now, I would say. So it looks at inequalities, structural issues, oppression, and this is more of like a critical sociologist, but I think most sociology today is fairly critical or critical leaning. So it examines issues from now. Issues of inequality of power of just like life in general on a macro or a micro level now, but situates it historically. Certainly that these things aren't the way they are simply because of how we've organized ourselves now, but it comes from this kind of lineage. And I would say anthropology tends to look much more broadly at historical elements that lead to the way things are today. But it pays attention to different things in societies and in cultures. And so we much more focus in anthropology on culture. In sociology, we much more focus on societies. And those have slightly different definitions. You can have culture across different societies, depending on how you define society. That could be a small group of people. That could be a nation state. That could be our globalized world. So within sociology, we tend to focus on those powers and inequality, and so what is focused on more in anthropology are things like meaning-making, norms, language, customs, which certainly there are cultural sociologists who focus on that, but it tends to be a different aspect of the lived experience that's focused on from each side. So cultural anthropology tends to focus on slightly more qualitative methods in general. You don't really see any quantitative work being done in anthropology because it's about observation, about participant observation, interviews, certainly content analysis. Sociology has all of that, but also tends to favor slightly more a quantitative or a mixed methods approach.
Should have asked you that question many times over before. I just think of our listeners, right? They come into this container of language that you and I have commonly used over the years. If I was a listener, a brand new listener, and I'm always thinking about onboarding them to what Genn and Millie is and what Genn and Millie is about, I apologize for the planes in the background. Tess apologizes for George, her dog. But if you're a regular listener, you've become so immersed in this container that the planes and George are norms. Those are things that are just now part of it. So I'm always thinking about onboarding and how when someone comes into a dialogue, what might they be missing out on, or needing more context about, or needing a broader view of. The last question I have for you is how do you feel that you did? And I'd like you to be honest.
Yeah.
Honest.
Yeah. I mean, it feels weird to say it, but I feel like it did really well. I feel like I responded to the questions well. I feel good about my presentation. I think if I were to do it all over again, I don't know that I would change anything, and maybe that's how I evaluate if I did well. I'm not critical of myself. I'm not reliving a lot of it. And maybe that's not great. Maybe I should be reliving some of it, like the positive aspects of what people are saying. But I think when things tend to go over and over in my head, it's because I'm criticizing what I said or how I approached things or what I did, and I'm not doing that. So yeah, I think that's a positive thing. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I did really well. Without, I don't know, it feels braggy to say, which is all of what we say not to, right? That it's not braggy. Yeah, I feel like I knocked it out of the park. Yeah,
you did.
Passed with high distinction, so I couldn't have gotten a higher grade.
It may feel weird to say it. It did not feel weird to witness it.
Yeah,
it felt like
like when I say I could have gone 2 hours longer, like double that time, like it was not a joke. And so that's such a good example of flow. Like I was so in my element. Like I know this stuff backwards and forwards. I wrote the document that we're debating right now. I wrote the presentation that we listened to. Like this is my, magnum opus in a lot of ways. A lot of work will come out of this and probably something bigger, but in many ways, this has been the last year and a half of my life has been putting together this document and doing this work. And so, yeah, I know it well. And so to get to because it's taken up so much of my life and my brain and my energy, there was something so life-giving about engaging with people that were really interested and curious about it. And so, yeah, I mean, nothing except I had fun. It was a fun time,
and
which
you
seems
could tell.
Wild.
You could tell.
And defense.
And all of us who were present were having fun too. So it was fun to witness, fun to see someone in their purpose and their why, especially someone I've known and known their dedication and their diligence and their journey. And then most important for me, of course, was to witness your family.
Yeah.
To see your parents, just clearly so proud. It was quite remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. They were, my parents, my sister, it was such a proud moment. They were, my dad was tearing up, my mom was, my sister was happy cheering on. So yeah, it was really fun. And it was, like I mentioned, so cool to have them and my other friends and colleagues of the past. Steph was on, who I know sometimes listens here to our episodes, and so thank you so much, Steph, for coming. And just to have them see what you're doing is in a way that most of the times you don't get to know about people's work in that way or see them in action in that way was really special. So it meant so much that so many people came. I was nervous ahead of it. I was like, oh my gosh, inviting all these people, and what if it doesn't go well? And then it just made it so much more meaningful to have people there.
It was awesome. Well, I thought it would be fun today for us to do a little behind the scenes and ask you some questions and have you explain it to us from that perspective, because it is a tremendous accomplishment, a lot to celebrate, and thought it would be fun here for our listeners to have, we just don't do Genn and Millie episodes full time.
Yeah. I mean, if we did, there'd probably be more than what we have.
Right. You are doing some remarkable, amazing work, and I thought it would be good for us to share about it here.
Everyone, thank you for tuning in to episode 124 of Genn and Millie. I'm sorry for George's in the background here. If you enjoyed today's conversation, consider sharing this episode with a friend. To interact with us and share your responses to the questions we posed, give us a follow on Instagram. We didn't pose any questions, but thank you for listening and reflecting with us. Feel free to give us a follow on Instagram at Genn and Millie. That's at GennandMillie. Until next time.